Welcome, everyone. I'm Jean Kelcher, and I am with the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired. And we're very happy to have a nice collaborative effort with Madison Audubon here to present Birding by Ear. We've been doing this for a number of years now, and people seem to really like it, and so we keep doing it. Here at the Council, we are a private agency. Our mission is to promote the dignity and empowerment of the people in Wisconsin who are blind and visually impaired by providing services, advocating legislation, and educating the general public. We have sort of three links to our mission: advocacy, education, and vision services. So we've been around since 1952. And those three things, those three parts of our mission, we have a very busy advocacy schedule, and we have a lot of vision services that are going on in spite of the pandemic, and our education programs are just starting to open up again. Starting to see those coming now that spring and summer are coming. Hopefully that will continue to increase. So that's a bit about the council, and during break, I'd be more than happy to talk to others about it. Okay. Brenna?
Yeah, I'm Brenna Marsichek. I'm the Director of Communications and Outreach with Madison Audubon. We are a nonprofit, a local chapter of National Audubon, but a separate organization. And we are just delighted to be here with you again this year. There are a couple folks that I've seen in our other spring classes that we have going on, as well as a couple from our citizen science program. So we do a lot of bird conservation, and most of that is done through habitat restoration. We have about 2,000 acres that we own and manage and have restored to native habitats, and those are in the form of sanctuaries that are free and open for anyone to visit. They're great places to practice birding by ear. So if you have any questions about how to get to those places, I'd be happy to chat with you. We also do that through youth and community education programming. We have a bunch of citizen science programs, adult education programs. We do field trips normally, and we're hoping to be able to host a few again this year. And through advocacy work as well. So it's great to see all of you. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to chat.
Okay. People who are here tonight, Lynn, you can.
Hi folks, I'm Lynn from the council. I am the interim communications director, and I'm happy to be here tonight for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Good evening. I am Jim Denham. I am the Access Technology Specialist with the Council, and I've been doing Birding by Ear now for 3 or 4 years. I'm in Fitchburg and still love to just listen to the sounds of the birds. So really appreciate everybody being here tonight and hope you get a lot out of it.
Okay. And Carrie?
My name's Carrie Wilcox, and I'm volunteering with this program for both the council and for Madison Audubon, and I've done it for about four years. It's our 4th year. Yeah.
Yep. And Carrie's being quite modest. He actually was the person who came forward with this idea, and has been the developer and the designer of our Birding by Ear program. So he's very modest and just sort of saying who he is. But so I'll turn it over to Carrie.
It's a team.
You can see yourself that he knows a lot about birds. Okay, Carrie.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. This is our 4th year, as I said, it's 2021. We don't normally, well, the idea was that originally we'd do this all in person, and hopefully next year we can do it again in person, especially the field portion where we can go out and be out in a local park. We've used Pheasant Branch, which has been fantastic. Let's keep our fingers crossed that things will go as well as we think they are for next year. Okay, well, welcome again. And just sort of an idea of what's going to happen, I'm going to do a little background presentation on sort of the context of bird song and call, and learning them. And then Jim is all, we're going to do a group activity where we break out into 4 small breakout rooms with less people, and we'll work on some individual songs and calls and other non-vocal sounds. And then Jim will talk after we do that, and then we present to each other. Jim will talk about technology and apps and things that are useful for learning bird sounds that he's researched and has some good tips on. So the goals of tonight in general are to introduce you to birding, and it's obviously a very popular pastime in North America and around the world. There's eBird is crazy. It's one of these things where you can put your bird lists on, birds you've seen, and that data can be used by scientists to further conservation goals. And it's astounding how fast that has grown over the last decade. Primarily, we want you to come away with learning skills to identify birds by song. So I wouldn't worry if you come away from these classes not remembering any particular bird song. Just know that you can use these skills to keep that learning and slowly build that library of bird songs and calls in your head. So that's really the main goal tonight, is to really learn some skills to identify birds. And then we want to inspire people to be champions for conservation. Birds are a nice window into the environment and the natural world. They're around most of the daytime and even at night, whereas a lot of other animals are hard to find and see and hear. They are, a lot of them are plentiful, so they're relatively easy to find, and they have some wonderful sounds to hear. So it makes a lot of sense. It's a way to get into learning about and supporting conservation goals. I think earlier Jim talked about, we were talking about our spark birds. So these are birds that birders sometimes refer to, which inspire them to learn more about birds or get into birding or learn more about conservation or wildlife in general. And I wanted to pick out birds. I wanted to pick out my bird that had a particularly good sound and something that really inspired me because of its sound. And the one I chose is the Allen's Hummingbird, which is a West Coast hummingbird. It's mostly found on the coast of California, down through Baja, Mexico. And I first encountered it in the 90s, early 90s in a class. We were walking outside and this thing was doing, it was a male doing a courtship display. I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never heard anything like it. And this is what it sounded like. Everybody hear that okay? The sound coming through? Okay. So this is a male that's doing like a shallow U-shaped back and forth pendulous display over the nesting area or the territory that it wants to attract a mate to. Back and forth, back and forth. And those sounds that you're hearing are not vocalizations for the most part. It's mostly the tail feathers that it rattles, it shakes, and the wind going through it makes that buzzing sound. And at the end of that, unfortunately, we don't hear the whole thing, but it goes up into the sky about 100, 150 feet and then dives at a very steep speed. And when it hits over the top of this area that it wants to attract a mate to, it makes this ripping sound with its tail, and it's just unbelievably spectacular. So that really got me hooked. I mean, I was completely hooked at that point. And now I want to pass it to Jim, who also was hooked by a particular bird. Jim?
Sure, thank you. So I was born in northern Wisconsin and spent quite a bit of time up there as a kid with relatives and different things. And I remember being out in the lakes at night, fishing or just being out in canoes and different things. and hearing this bird off in the distance, and just an amazing sound. It's just haunting and just hard to believe that one animal can make such a sound. And this is the common loon, and it just had an amazing sound. It just really drew me into, wow, just got listening to other birds because of this one. So if you want to go ahead and play the.
All right, here we go.
It's haunting, yet it's just captivating, and you just really want to know what that is. And it's just, it's an amazing sound to me, and something that I will always associate with lakes and just, thinking about different birds. So definitely something that drew me into the hobby.
Cool, thank you, Jim. And we were talking a little bit about this clip before, and I think you can probably hear the waves lapping against the shore there. Which is also really fun to listen to when you're listening to these audio clips. Sometimes you can hear other things that give context to the location or just other creatures around. So it's really cool. All right, this is something I don't want to belabor too much, but it's absolutely, you might hear me say this a lot, is this quote from David Pryor, who is a biologist at California State Parks. The best birders are the best listeners. And this is hands down a truism, especially when you're dealing with, when you're looking for and working with land birds. Might not be as true if you're working with water birds like ducks. They're less vocal some of the time, and a little harder to hear when they're out in the middle of a lake. Obviously, loons are a little bit different. They're not a duck too, but they're quite vocal, and you can hear them for miles. So they're really cool. But with land birds and songbirds in particular, a lot of times they're up in the tops of trees. They're buried in the shrubbery. They're very difficult to see at times, and it's almost I don't know, 50%, 75% of the birds I hear before I ever see them, and sometimes I never see them. So it's a really critical skill to have, being able to listen for and identify birds this way. All right, so we're going to listen to, speaking of listening, we're going to listen to a bit of a dawn chorus, which is sort of what birds do in the early morning. They all start singing right about half an hour before dawn, sunrise, and a little bit after. And it's usually a cacophony of sound, and it can be a little overwhelming, but it's also quite beautiful. And this is from Minocqua, Wisconsin. It's quite long, it's over an hour, but we're not gonna listen to the whole thing. I'm gonna start playing, I'll play about a minute, and then what I want you to do is just listen, and in your head or on a piece of paper, try to note how many different sounds you might be hearing, and maybe associate that with a particular bird species. If you can sort of get a count going, rough count in your head as to how many birds you might be hearing during this clip. And we'll come back in about a minute. Let's see if I can cue it here. Here we go. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is then put in your, in the chat room, in the chat button, where's that? how many birds you think you heard, how many different species you think you heard. And just type that in right now. We'll give you 15 seconds or 20 seconds to do that. Fourteen, 12, 9, 7, 15. Okay. 7, 15, 7. Yeah. So we're getting a nice sort of, looks like an average of somewhere around 10, 7 to 15 or so. That's great. I mean, that's really kind of what I was hearing too. Obviously, there may be more that we're missing or just hard to hear, but that is a great start. You're on your way to being a sound birder. This particular recording apparently has 29 species. I have them listed on the slide. There's swans and loons. So you probably heard the loon. There's a yellow-bellied sapsucker that I heard. There's a least flycatcher I heard, crow, yellow warbler, things like that. There was an oriole at one point. So there's all kinds of stuff in there if you listen through. This link is provided in the materials we'll send you after the class too. So nice job. I have two main tips when it comes to birding by ear, sort of overarching tips, and they are to know where you are in your space, in the environment. So know whether you're in a meadow, whether you're in the forest, just keep that in mind, whether you're in a bog or a marsh, because if you know the habitat you're in, you can start to whittle down the number of species that you're likely to be hearing. So it just helps narrow down the choices. And then the other obvious thing is know what time of year you're in, because obviously during migration, there can be a lot of new birds that are moving through. But in the breeding season, we'll just have the birds that stick around for the breeding season. And then winter is obviously a whole new slew of birds that might come down for the winter, just the winter. And you might have birds that stay here all year round too. So keeping those two things in mind, where you are in the environment and what time of year you're in, maybe even what time of day you're in. That way you can really start to narrow down the choices you have that are most likely when you're struggling to figure out what you're hearing. You know, we have a couple of pictures up. One of a red-winged blackbird in the middle of a meadow, and another one of a number of geese. I believe they're geese migrating. It's against the sky. A couple dozen geese flying. All right. So what are these birds using all these sounds for? The main things that I have listed here are marking and defending territories, attracting mates, communication with or coordination with others, other birds essentially. And those communications might include location. So where are you? I am here. Is it safe? I'm hungry, feed me. Get away from here, get away from me, get away from my babies, that kind of stuff. There could be scolding. There could be alerts, birds that send out sort of alarm calls when a predator is nearby. You hear that with jays and chickadees and crows a lot. Or there can be incidental sounds that are just the sound of their wings as they're flying, or their bills as they're eating, or sometimes they'll scratch through duff on the forest floor or dry leaves, and you can hear them doing that. So those are really the main reasons that a lot of these vocalizations and other sounds are being used. On this slide, there's a picture of a song sparrow singing. A song sparrow is a little, pill bottle sized bird, brown and white, very cryptic, kind of like wet areas, and they have a beautiful song that is appropriate for their name. All right, you'll hear, and I've used this already, the term song and the term call, and they are differentiated in a lot of the birding books that you'll see and birding websites that you'll read, and they don't necessarily have a scientific meaning, but they're generally used to mean different things. So calls are generally vocalizations that are produced by both males and females, and they're not particularly different between the two, and they can be heard all year round. And there's no clear association with the breeding season or breeding behavior. They don't necessarily have a real strong pattern or rhythm that you can sort of point to. They're a little more random than songs, and most of the time they're not as tonal. They don't have a melodious sound like songs often do. There's a lot of variation, and calls can be quite. They can have quite a repertoire of calls, and we have an example from an American crow, a familiar backyard bird, and this is probably the call that you're used to. It's the crow.
Zoom meeting. You are viewing Carrie Wilcox's screen. You are using the computer audio. You are in the meeting hosted by Jean Cal.
Hello, whoever joined us. We're just about to listen to a crow call. Here we go. So it kind of a little harder to predict when the next sound is going to come. There's not an obvious rhythm there, other than probably just the breathing pattern of the bird. And that's the typical call, right, of crows. They have a lot of vocalizations that you're probably not familiar with. If you ever get a chance to just listen to them close by, when there's maybe a pair during breeding season, there's some interesting sort of softer sounds that they make. And then we'll listen to the call of another familiar bird, the American robin. Let's hear that. Again, it's not a little hard to pin down what's going to come next with a call. It's just kind of, it is sort of like the way human speech is compared to human song. So human song there's more rhythm and pattern to it, whereas human speech tends to be a little more random and a little harder to predict. So then a song is described usually as a vocalization, often, if not mostly, produced by the male to attract mates and to defend territory, and therefore it's mostly limited to the breeding season. The sounds are often a little more fixed, they're a little more regular, they have a strong pattern, a strong rhythm, they're repeated regularly during the course of the singing, and they're typically a learned behavior. There might be a fundamental sort of template that they're born with, but they learn the basics of the song from their father. Now, there is more research going into female bird song, and they're finding more and more species where females sing than they thought before. This cardinal that I have a picture of right now is one of those. The females sing quite a bit, actually, and I've been fooled a lot of times into thinking there was only a male there, and it turned out to be a female singing. So it's really an interesting field of study. And if you're unfamiliar with cardinals, they're a sort of medium-sized songbird, maybe the size of a small can of soda. They're bright red, crimson red, with a black face mask, and the feathers on their crown can be lifted and stick up, sort of like a headdress almost. And they kind of do that when they're angry or excited. They stick their feathers straight up. So let's listen to the song of a northern cardinal here. So again, the songs tend to be a little more regular, and there's tone, there's nice tone in there. And you can sort of predict what's coming next when you're listening to a phrase of a song. Mostly. There's a few exceptions, obviously. And just to compare that to the cardinal's call, let's listen to that. So I guess what I would point out is that it's very simple, obviously, not a lot of tone, it's just a simple chip note, but also that you can't really say how long the pause is going to be between each chip. Sometimes it's shorter, sometimes it's longer, it's not clear. So that kind of points out that this bird is phrasing a call as opposed to a song. And that chip note can be, you can hear that all day long. They're often talking to each other that way, just communicating, making sure the other mate knows where they are. It's sort of letting each of them know where they are. And they'll do it once they have young too. You'll hear the adults do that, and the young birds, the fledglings, will have a different sounding call, which I don't have a recording of, but it is something you'll hear a lot later in the summer. Okay, so we're going to do another quiz for your chat window. So get your chat window ready. We're going to play a sound, and I'd like you to just answer whether you think it's a song or a call based on what we've just talked about. So here we go. Oops, let me play that again. All right.
We're seeing lots of calls.
Lots of calls.
A song in there, mostly calls.
Mostly calls.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We still getting answers, or is it?
Nope.
Okay, so I'll move on to the answer. Most of you guys, it sounds like, are correct. This is the call of a white-breasted nuthatch. I'll play it one more time. Sort of not super rhythmic in terms of a regular rhythm. And it comes, and then there's pauses, and you can't quite tell when the next one's going to come. So yeah, that's the call of a nuthatch. They don't really have a song. Some birds don't. Some birds have both. Crows don't have a song either. But this is definitely considered a call. Nuthatches are a small arboreal bird who maybe, again, the size of a small pill bottle or something like that. White face, black crown, and they have nice little short tails because it wouldn't serve them very well to have a big, long, heavy, unwieldy tail when they're running around tree trunks. And they have a nice sort of needle-like bill with a little bit of an upturn, and they use it to probe into bark and leaf clusters and get at grubs and stuff to eat. All right, so the next thing is non-vocal sounds, and these are really interesting because a lot of them will function like calls and songs in that they're either just communication or they are breeding defense or breeding mating attraction. So with that in mind, let's listen to one that's just sort of, it may be incidental, but there may be more to it. I haven't quite figured out from what I've read whether they think that there's more to this. This is a common bird that everybody should know, the mourning dove. When they take off from a sitting position, they sound like this. I'll play it again. Oh, I guess that wasn't it. Let's play it one more time. So that's just the sound of their wings. It's not a vocalization. It could, there could be something to it. It might be something that helps other birds know that there's a threat potentially. You know, if a bird takes off because it sees something, that sound may alert other mourning doves, or it could just be incidental. I guess it's possibly a little of both. It might have started out as incidental and now it's become useful. But that's something you can use to identify a mourning dove. I have identified many mourning doves without seeing them. I just hear them take off behind me. And I knew it was a mourning dove because of that sound. All right, let's do another bird. This is the American woodcock. This is a very chunky, medium-sized shorebird with a long bill that it uses to probe into dirt for worms and things. And in April, when it's here in Wisconsin, after it migrates up to Wisconsin, the male does this courtship display where it flies up into the air and makes this sound here. So some of that, I think, is vocal, the chip, 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 but the twittering sound is the sound of wind going through its outer wing feathers. And that is a display it uses to attract mates. Pretty interesting bird. And then finally, you might hear bill snap sounds. We'll hear a little bit of a eastern phoebe, which is a flycatcher, a small songbird. And it's making this sound where it snaps its bill together a couple times. We'll play it one more time because it's kind of light. Generally, when they're snapping multiple times like that, it may be antagonistic. They may be sort of aggressive towards another bird. Sometimes if they're just feeding, you'll hear a single snap where they're snapping at flying insects, but that kind of multiple snapping is probably a more antagonistic behavior. Okay, do we have any questions so far? Anything in the chat window, Jean? Do you see anything?
Nothing in the chat. If somebody has a question, you can raise your hand, or you can just press on your space bar to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay.
So none coming up here.
None seeing, so maybe we'll move on. Feel free to type anytime during the presentation and we'll try to go to our next. I think we're running a little long, so I'm going to try to move through this next section fairly quickly so we can get on to the group presentation. So some things that are important for listening, some tips for listening. We've talked a little bit about listening to rhythm, pitch, the tone of the sound, the timbre or the quality of the sound, and the repetition or the pattern. So really those things are really critical when you're listening to sound, to try to identify sort of the pieces of the sound, and that'll help you get to the point where you can recognize them again. Use mnemonics as much as you can. Mnemonics are memory devices, memory tricks, essentially memory devices. A lot of times for birders, that would come in the form of a phrase, an English phrase or a nonsense syllable phrase that helps you sort of lock that sound into your brain. And we'll talk a little bit about more about those. I think I'm going to skip this slide, but I'll just explain it a little bit. This is an example of timbre contrast. And a timbre, again, is quality. So think of a pure note, somebody singing with a note from somebody who's got a really gravelly voice. It's the same note, but the timbre is different. One is really pure, the other's like rough and gravelly. So that's really what timbre is about. So mnemonics are really helpful, any kind of mnemonic. Again, a lot of times we'll talk about these phrases that's supposed to sound like the bird song, and a lot of people are like, it doesn't sound anything like that. But really what it does is help you sort of lock in the pattern and the repetition and the rhythm of the song or the call, not necessarily the actual sound of it. So I'll play a couple here. Eastern Meadowlark, the mnemonic phrase for this is supposed to be, I do love spring of the year. And let's hear if you agree with that. It's got another little bit there that's not included in the mnemonic, but you can sort of hear that. I do love spring of the year. I also always remember that because my professor talked about how he felt the sun on his neck whenever he heard that bird, because they're found in meadows. And so he always remembers being out in the open sun. And I've always remembered that too. So I'll hear that bird singing and suddenly I'm standing in a meadow, like I just feel like I'm in a meadow. So that's another type of mnemonic, right? It's just, it's not a verbal one. It's more like a feeling and a memory. The other one that's kind of cool is this blue-winged warbler. So this one has a mnemonic of bee buzz. And again, that's not an English phrase, but it's sort of the sound it's supposed to make. And other people have described this as a raspy inhale and exhale. So you'll hear that. So that one, you probably described the timbre as pretty rough and buzzy. And there might be another species that has a very pure sound. In fact, I think there's a prairie warbler singing behind it. And their tone is a lot clearer, not so buzzy. Another good one is a common yellowthroat, which the mnemonic is supposed to be witchety, witchety, witchety. And I always think of Macbeth, the Shakespeare play with the witches in the marshes, and yellowthroats are often found in marshes, and they sound like this. And you might say, oh, it's not witchety, it's more witchetoo, and that's fine. You can use your own. I would encourage you to use your own. Make up your own sound mnemonic phrases to help you remember, because if it's personal, I think it'll be easier to remember. All right, so we're ready to start the group listening activity. Let me just go through a few basic instructions. There's going to be 6 sounds for each group. There are songs, calls, and non-vocal sounds. 2 of the sounds are paired, so you'll compare those 2 sounds. They're kind of similar, and I want you to just kind of listen to them and think about how they're similar and different. The others are just separate. You'll discuss each sound with the group for about 25 minutes or so to a half an hour. And then we'll take a short break and we'll come back and give feedback for a couple of your species, things that really intrigued you or you wanted to tell everybody in the full group. Sounds good? Well, welcome back. I hope everybody got through your songs and calls and non-vocals. Anyone want to volunteer to go first, or we just want to go in order of numbers? What do we got here? We've got, is group 1, is that Brenna?
Yep.
Brenna, who do you got? What do you got for us?
We had a really great conversation. Does anyone from our group want to share a little bit about what birds we talked about, what they sounded like?
I can just share that I think it was, for me, it was hard. Or at least I think we did good as a group to figure out if it was a song, a call, or a non-vocal. But I know I struggled trying to get the rhythm, pitch,
Right.
maybe pattern sometimes. But once you hear it a little bit, then you can kind of maybe pick up on it. But I can see how it can take practice and time to get familiar with some of the things that you're looking to hear.
Right.
And Bill, if the mnemonics are helpful, like I said, there's a list that'll be in the stuff we send out, and go through those and kind of get familiar with those.
And I think that's something that I know I'd have to look at more. I know because one of the first questions is, what does this sound remind you of? And I think all of us in our group kind of said, I know at least I struggled to come up with some type of mnemonic for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It made sense after Brenna explained things, but it's hard to come up on your own sometimes.
Yeah. Agreed.
I think maybe we, as a group, could avoid the vireos as a beginner. Let's just skip the vireos for a little bit. But
So interesting.
I think we talked about, or we listened to the Cooper's Hawk call, and then compared that, or at least I did actually. I don't know that our group did, but I hope others picked up on the similarities to the Wilson Snipe non-vocal. I can play those for you if you want.
Yeah.
Because they are very cool and they sound interestingly similar.
Brenna Marsisek has started screen share. You are viewing Brenna Marsisek's screen.
Okay, so this one here is actually, I'm going to wait until afterwards and see if you can.
That's a group.
Brenda, I think we lost your audio.
Oh, shoot. I'm sorry.
Brenna Marsisek has stopped screen share. Brenna Marsisek.
Okay, here we go again. Could you hear that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then this was the other one that sounds interestingly similar.
Wow.
So both of those we described as sort of like a laugh. Sounds similar to a laugh. But I think Andrea said the second one was more like diabolical or like crazy. It's just like a little too intense. So the first one was the Cooper's Hawk call. And the second was the Wilson Snipe non-vocal. So that's the mating display that the wind through the feathers creates that sound. So those were the couple ones that we
Marsisek has stopped screen share.
talking about.
All right.
Oh, cool.
Thanks for sharing.
Who's
So-
group 2? That is Lynn.
Yeah, we had a great discussion, and I'm gonna hand it over to Kira, who was our recorder for our group, to discuss a couple of the species.
Yeah, I guess if we're picking two, we'll pick the ones that we actually like identified correctly. We got like 2.5 right, I suppose.
That's pretty good.
So the first one that we heard, we identified it as a killdeer, and we described it as having kind of like a repetitive, like 2 notes. They were really high pitched. We thought it was a call, and it reminded me of like a dog squeaky toy, kind of that type of, I don't know, not really musicality, but that type of quality. And then the other one that we also identified was the tree swallow. And for that one in our clip, we thought it was like multiple birds kind of all like chattering at once. And it was very like bubbly, kind of like gurgling. I think someone in our group said it sounded like they were like I don't know, they sounded like it was kind of like unhappy, kind of an unhappy call, but I think it sounds kind of like bubbly. And yeah, that one we were able to get as a tree swallow because of that like bubbly quality. So
shall we listen? All right.
That Kira, that bubbly sound is definitely the way I separate the sound from other swallows. So that's a really good thing you noted there.
Right, I'll go with the one that Kira just described to you, the swallow. Yeah.
Like center water.
And the first one that she talked about was the killdeer. And here's that one. And I love the squeaky toy mnemonic reference. I'm not sure I'll ever hear that bird without thinking squeaky toy now.
Squeaky toy.
It was
Did anyone hear its name in the sound?
Killdeer.
Killdeer, 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 killdeer. That's how it gets its name, is from its call.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Jim?
Sure, group 3. We had Gina and Susan and Peter. And I think Peter is going to lead us off here.
Yeah. So we had some interesting sounds. And I think we had some thrushes that were very hard to distinguish between. And I think it would take me quite a bit of studying to really get to know those. But the first one that we had was a barred owl, which Ginny in our group was able to remember a mnemonic, which once she said it, and now that I can connect it, might actually work for me, which was great. So she came up with the "Who Cooks for You" mnemonic for the barred owl call.
And I will also say that somebody in our group came up with it, called that a nasally chicken, which is just like, like, I'll go ahead and play that one real quick if you want.
Sure.
Breakout group 3. Enter. 1.
Oh God. Wow.
Yeah, so had a great.
And we
had a great-
also, coming out of that, we also ended up with a question that no one knew the answer to, and that is, do owls have songs? And so we thought we'd ask that to the group, and if anybody has an answer.
This is one of those,
Breakout group 3.
Brenna, you might know. I always think that they do not, but there is, I mean, certainly some owls, including a great horn duet, they call back and forth to each other during the breeding season in sort of in a song duet of a sort. But I've never heard anyone officially describe their sounds as songs, but that's why I say I think that the term song and call can be a little fudgy at times.
Yeah, and the barred owl also has other noises like the monkey call
Yeah.
that makes. So, you know, there's like odd noises. And actually, a fun fact about the barred owl is that Harriet Tubman used that "Who cooks for you, who cooks for you all" call as her signal as she was moving people through the Underground Railroad.
Oh,
So
wow.
that was her signal that the coast was clear.
Oh.
And she was a great naturalist and used that call. So that's always a cool connection.
Another one of the sounds that we had in our group was a non-vocal sound, which seemed a little bit easier to pick up on because it was the pounding on wood of a woodpecker type sound.
4.mp3. Enter.
And so we were able to identify that as the yellow-bellied sapsucker. Although I think mostly because it was the only woodpecker on the list, more than anything else.
Yeah, sapsuckers have a very distinct pattern that they drum in compared to other woodpeckers. Most woodpeckers, when they're drumming to display, like it functions as a song, it's just a rapid, whereas the sapsuckers tend to have these various groupings of, that kind of stuff where there's these subsets. So they're really cool.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Cool.
4 left. Breakout meeting controls. Meeting controls. Alt S.
All right. So I think that leaves us group 4 and Carol. Do you is there any particular sounds you want to play or talk about?
Well, I figured I'd start with just the first one because it was such an unusual thing. It was just thump, 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 thump. Not like a woodpecker. It sounded like somebody, like a rabbit thumping its leg or something, its foot. But anyhow, it was a non-vocal. We decided it was non-vocal, and couldn't figure out. Pretty much, it was hard to figure out what that thing was. As it turned out, it was a rough grouse, which is about the size of a chicken, and it was beating its wings on its chest as a mating call, or mating performance. So that was pretty strange. Do you want to play that?
I can play that? Yeah, I'll play that right now. And I think our Peter, what did you compare it to, Peter? I believe it was a ball dropping
Oh, yeah,
on the, on the
right,
floor,
yeah,
right?
uh-huh, yeah, like dribbling a ball.
Dribbling a ball, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So anyhow, that was the first one. The second one that I thought I'd talk about is we had two songs. We were comparing two songs that were really very similar. They were very pure, higher pitched. The real difference between the two of them was basically in pattern. The first one had it was like four higher notes and then dropped down to three lower notes. And the mnemonic that we got was, please to meet ya. Please to meet ya. So anyhow, it was an interesting one, and that turned out to be a chestnut sided warbler. And the second sound that we were, again, pure sounding, higher song. We all figured they were small birds. Was a one where it was more like it was like four notes across, and then it dropped down and then went back up. So it was like Z Z Z Z Z Z. So do you want to play those two?
Yeah, and I just want to point out what I love about how Carol did this is she was really breaking it down into like these number of sounds and how they could like how they worked together. And that's a really obviously it could get complicated, but I thought it was really cool for somebody to break it down that way. So thanks, Carol. Let's hear the chestnut-sided warbler first.
Okay.
So that's the please to meet ya. And then the second is the black-throated green. Z. So that's what that's the typical mnemonics for those are. Yeah. And those are tough. I agree. These were a little more challenging. But yeah, it's kind of nice that you can actually, like, for such similar sounds, you can actually break down the differences in a sort of fundamental way.
And Carrie, there's a question in the chat for you.
Okay.
Would now be the time of year you could hear a grouse doing that non-vocal thumping sound?
Yes, I believe so. It might even be earlier too. I don't know enough about grouse, and I've never heard that in the wild, which is sad. I want to, but yeah, that was a mating courtship display thing. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I think we should move on and give Jim a few minutes to talk about how technology can be used for learning to bird by ear.
And while Jim is getting set up, Marge had asked a question somewhat related to Jim's topic here earlier in the evening about where do you find places to listen, or I lost my chat room. There it is. A place to purchase bird songs and calls to listen and identify them.
I think we'll cover that here in a little bit.
Yeah, Jim will go over some free options.
Yeah, no need to purchase. Keep your money. And Carrie, if you want to share the screen and put the slide up.
Oh yeah. Do we need any sound, Jim?
No. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier in the evening, I am the technology specialist with the council. So, most people think of birds and nature. You don't really think of technology. But technology really can do a lot to help us advance our knowledge of birds and really help us to do some different things with birding and listen to some of these different sounds and learn the sounds before we go out into the wild. So really, technology can do a lot to enhance our hobby of birding. It can be kind of a neat thing. But just a couple quick things to remember. We'd like to call the ethics of sounds in nature when you are thinking about pre-recorded sounds and other different things, because some of these sounds can actually trigger responses in birds. I'll tell the story of, I like to use headphones. I was telling my small group, I like to use headphones. And one of the reasons I use headphones is I'm not disturbing birds around here, because I was actually editing some sound files for this presentation a couple weeks ago, and I had the windows open. All of a sudden I was playing some sounds and I thought I could hear birds outside kind of responding to it. I'm like, wow, that's, what if it'd be like if you're walking down the street and somebody still yelled, free money, free money. You're probably going to respond to that, or stay away from here. You're probably going to respond to that. So we need to just be able to, trigger that these birds they do have responses if we are playing recorded sounds. So if you are, going to play the sounds, make sure you play them either before you leave home or use headphones. If you're going to play them in the wild, definitely use headphones, so you're not exposing them to predators. You might be telling them as a predator, so you could potentially cause them come to an area where they there's a predator. You could be taking them away from their young, which could be not a good thing as well. So consider use your headphones or use sounds at home. And some locations even prohibit playback. So if you're in a park, they may be prohibiting of playback, and it's always illegal for endangered species. So you never want to play the sounds of endangered species, because that is illegal. So just be really cautious, because our recording equipment is so good these days. I mean, there's we can pretty much have great recordings of some of these birds, and some of the resources I want to talk about in a little bit have terrific recordings that you can get. So you don't want to be, playing those out into the wild, and so just use headphones. I think headphones is a great way to listen to the calls and songs as well, because it really allows you to hear some of the background noise as well, and kind of really listen to the sound a little bit better. So I really encourage you, if you are going to be using a lot of birding on technology, get a good pair of headphones. So as mentioned, there are two really good websites that you can go to kind of learn about bird sounds and read about the different birds. The first is allaboutbirds.org, and these are all both listed in your resources list, the document that was sent out. So the resources list, there's links to them in the Word document. So Birds of the World, All About Birds is totally free. And there's just some great sounds on there, some great audio. You can go and you can capture this audio and download it and listen to it. And not only reading about the birds and learning about their habitat, but you can also, listen to the different sounds. And I found it really useful when I say, I wonder what this sound is. I'm hearing this, here's what I think this is. And I'll put on my headphones and go and say, oh, is that an American robin? Or, just something like that, just kind of hear what it sounds like. So if you think you know what something is, you can come in and, play it, put your headphones on and look it up and say, yeah, that sounds really similar. It must be the same thing. So that can be a really useful one. The other website is birdsoftheworld.org. And Birds of the World, you can get some things for free, but it is a subscription website. And I think it's $50 a year. But it's really, birds from all around the world. So if you're really into different bird calls and bird songs, great place to there's tons of stuff out there. I should also mention, for those of you who are screen reader users, these websites are both fully accessible and fully usable with screen readers and screen magnifiers. So if we are using Access technology, that's something to be considerate of. They're very accessible. So those are two really good websites. Like, again, allaboutbirds.org and birdsoftheworld.org. So great places to go and to listen to these different bird calls and songs and nonverbals, and some great recordings on those websites. There's also two apps that I want to talk about. We're always talking about apps. And these are apps that are available for both Android and iOS. So if you're on an Android phone or an iPhone or an iPad, you can get these apps, and these apps are both free. The first one is Song Sleuth. And Carrie, if you want to put up the slide with the pictures of that. So Song Sleuth is an app that will help you it'll play, you can record different songs, and it will help you to identify what the songs might be. So when you first install it, it's going to ask you what state you're in, so that you can kind of tell, hey, some birds are made, native to the Midwest or native to the different coasts. So it's going to ask you what state you're in. It also tries to determine the time of year that it is. So certain birds have songs at certain times of the year. So it really help that determine. But once you get that all set up, you can do a small recording, and you can record a clip of a bird. And the neat thing is it records the last 3 seconds. So if you are in the middle of a song and you push the record button, it's going to catch the last 3 seconds of what before you push the record button. So definitely something that's really kind of a neat feature of it. I will say, if you are using VoiceOver on a phone, if you're using a screen reader on a phone, be careful to turn on your screen reader volume. Otherwise, it's going to catch the volume. It's going to catch the screen reader, and that's not a bird song. So definitely something to think about. But it's just a neat app to record a bird song, and then once you record it, you tap the ID button, and it analyzes it and then gives you 3 possible species that it may be. It is much better identifying songs than it is calls, because a lot of times calls, like we heard, are real quick, short. So it is better at identifying songs. And obviously, the clearer the sound you can get, the better. So if there's a lot of traffic in the background, that can be a problem. So, but it's a fun app to try, and it's just, it's totally free. So give it a try, and record a song, and run the identifier. It's just a kind of fun way to see if what this song may be, and maybe you're right. So it's a good way to kind of identify something. The last app we'll talk about is called Larkwire. And this is a game that you can play on iPad or Android or iPhone. And the basic level is free. I think you can play the first, I think 10 or 15 ones that are free. And then after, I think there might be a purchase price, in-app purchase. But it just allows you to kind of test your knowledge of different birds, calls and songs. It's called Larkwire, Larkwire. Again, a totally accessible, very usable, but just kind of a fun way to, if you're sitting at home and you want to listen to some birds, try this one out. This is a lot of fun in the wintertime. It's snowy out, cold outside, and you kind of want to, bring the thoughts of spring into your head and kind of listen to some bird calls and some bird songs that you might be hearing for the upcoming birding season. This is kind of a fun thing to try out on your iPhone or iPad or Android phone. So it's called Larkwire. Definitely check it out. So there's lots of technology solutions out there that can help us kind of learn the different calls, hear the different calls, try the different calls out, and even identify some of the different calls. So definitely encourage you, if you have an iPhone or have a computer, check some of these different things out and experiment with it. And I think it's going to really enhance your birding hobby.
I got to take my mute off. Thank you, Jim. I've known a number of people who've tried at least Song Sleuth, and it definitely works. Good number of times, especially if you get a good recording. It's very successful. Kind of fun. Just to wrap up, some things to keep in mind. It's a lot of information to take in at once, and obviously you're not necessarily going to remember all of these species that we heard tonight, maybe none of them. I mean, it's all about just getting yourself in the frame of mind to learn them, learning some tips and skills, how to learn them, and then practicing, being patient with yourself. Learn the birds in your backyard first, a few of them, and then just go from there. And just keep your ears open and your mind open, and just let yourself enjoy the sounds. And again, try to use all the associations you can, time of year, place, phrases, however else you can remember these sounds. We have next week, we're doing the virtual field trip on May 6th or May 8th, depending on which one you signed up for. And what I'd like you to try to do, where's that? What I'd like you to try to do is, before the next field trip, is just go outside. If you have a good iPhone that makes some good recordings, record one or more bird sound that you hear out there. And you can do one or more of any of these things that I'm talking about. Whatever makes you happy, right? And then write or record a description of the bird sounds you hear. So describe what, some of the things, maybe answer some of the questions we discussed today in the breakout rooms. And then write or record how you experience the bird sounds. So pay attention to the time of day, the weather, other sounds you were hearing, anything, memories that it brought up or how you felt hearing it, anything else. And you could describe a spark bird. Maybe you have a spark bird that got you interested in birding. So you could describe that. So one or more of the following, just kind of get that down on paper or just record something or remember it. And we'll try to discuss some of them next week.
Yeah, and if you do a recording of a bird, maybe do something quick and simple, maybe like a 15, 20, 30 seconds. You don't have to record, 10 minutes of a bird and whatever. So it's, just try and just get a, 15-second clip or something like that. And if you want to try out Song Sleuth as well, it might be another activity you could do is download Song Sleuth if you have a phone and try and identify a bird using Song Sleuth. We want to make this interactive. We want to make it, something you guys can try and get into this expo and come back to us with questions next time we meet.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. I think that does it for us. Jean, anything else you want to wrap up with?
Nope. Glad that everybody was here this evening and hope you had a good time and that you'll come back next Thursday for the virtual field trip.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks everybody.